When the United States Marine Corps, when the United States of America asked me to go to Iraq to serve my country, I did it. I did what they asked me to do it, and I did it honorably, and I'm very proud of that service. When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not.
Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance is claiming that Tim Walz lied about his military service, going so far as to accuse him of stolen valor. That's a serious accusation, especially in veterans communities. We'll give you the reality. But first, here's more from J.D. Vance at a press conference this morning. Take a look.
I think it's shameful to prepare your unit to go to Iraq, to make a promise that you're gonna follow through, and then to drop out right before you actually have to go. I also think it's dishonest. He made this interesting comment that the Kamala Harris campaign put out there, and I bet they're regretting they put it out there now, because he said that and he was making a point about gun control. He said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone?
For context, Vance is a former Marine who deployed to Iraq. He worked as a civil affairs Marine who helped escort journalists around the country. However, Tim Walz served in the military for 24 years, enlisting in the Nebraska National Guard at 17 in 1981, and then transferring to the Minnesota National Guard in 1996. In 2003, he was sent to Italy, where he served with the European Security Force to support the war in Afghanistan. He was also stationed in Norway for joint training with other NATO militaries. Walz specialized in heavy artillery and had proficiency ribbons in sharpshooting and hand grenades, though it's true he never saw combat. He retired in 2005 to begin his successful run for the US House, representing Minnesota as Command Sergeant Major, among the highest ranks for enlisted soldiers. A few months after Walz's retirement, his battalion was deployed to Iraq, and a few people who served with him said they felt betrayed by his departure. In a letter posted to Facebook in 2018, as he first ran for governor, retired Command Sergeants Major Thomas Behrens and Paul Herr said Walz retired from his 24-year tenure in the National Guard after learning that his battalion would be deployed to Iraq, despite allegedly assuring his fellow troops he would join them. But other people he served with disputed those claims and said Walz had always talked about launching a political career. Joseph Eustace, a 32-year veteran of the Guard who led the same battalion as Walz, said the governor fulfilled his duty. He was a great soldier, Eustace added. When he chose to leave, he had every right to leave. He also went on to work extensively on veterans issues in Congress. He sat on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and became its ranking member in 2017. Fellow congressional alum and veteran Adam Kinzinger, a Republican, defended Walz, tweeting in response to Vance's accusations, okay, JD served honorably, but he wasn't kicking down doors. He was in public affairs, which again is fine and honorable. Tim, after he was eligible for retirement, retired. People do that. If it was a real problem, he would have been stop-lossed and prevented from retiring. Reporter Tim Murphy added, Walz retired at retirement age, but more specifically, he retired to run for Congress on a platform of ending the war, ran ads about the devastation the war had caused, and then voted to bring everyone home within 90 days. That was, of course, unsuccessful. Now, the Trump-Vance campaign also has another reason to be careful with this line of attack, considering that Donald Trump is a literal draft dodger. He avoided service in the Vietnam War through student and medical deferments. He said he got a medical deferment for a bone spur in a foot, but couldn't remember which foot when he talked about it in 2015. He reportedly called soldiers who died in war suckers and losers. And he also called his sex life in the 80s his own personal Vietnam.
Hey, don't scroll away. Come back. Because before the video continues, we just want to urge you to lend your support to TYT. You power our honest reporting. You do it at tyt.com/team, and we love you for it.
I mean, why did I not know that, and now I can't unknow that, Jordan?
You're welcome.
What does that even mean? There was a lot of Agent Orange, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, I guess there was. That's what he was calling his bronzer that was all over the sheets. Ugh. This is the dumbest attack line. I'm gonna jump in and just be like, don't go here, JD. You don't wanna do this. You really don't. Walz was bragging about how he's a good shooter. Even Kamala Harris was like, he's an excellent shot. Are we gonna go here? Is that what we're gonna do? And here's the thing about me, an anti-war progressive. Like, you tell me that you didn't deploy to Iraq and like murder innocent men, women, and children? Based. I'm down with that. You mean you represented veterans in Congress and their issues and the fact they're never taken care of when they come back from war, that they're sent to die for Dick Cheney's, stock prices in Halliburton, and ostensibly to go get the terrorists who were never even in Iraq to begin with? Based. Stop barking up this tree. Stop shaking it, because like it's getting nothing but fruit for our side.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways of looking at it, right? JD Vance is trying to hone in on the combat zone angle. And then when pressed on it today, CNN asked, okay, well, did you see combat? And then he's like, whoa, I never said I was in a firefight. So he didn't either. Like, neither of them did. But if you look at what they did and the likelihood that they could see combat, JD Vance went in there to do PR. JD Vance, similar to Pete Buttigieg, went in there in relatively safe positions. Tim Walz did get deployed multiple times, although he didn't see combat, thankfully. He was in there for 24 years, and people have looked at the timeline pretty closely. And of course, they mentioned he could have retired earlier. Mm-hmm. He stayed in longer. And then also, he submitted his paperwork for retirement, his paperwork for his congressional run in early 2005. A few months later, he submitted his paperwork for retirement. A few months after that is when the deployment orders to go to Iraq for his battalion came out. So he didn't know in early 2005 that later that year there would be deployment orders. And you look at his foreign policy record while he was in Congress, it's mixed, but there were multiple opportunities and multiple instances of him pushing for a war powers resolution, trying to end that war. Condemning US-backed coups and foreign intervention. I'm not saying he was a total peacenik, but he was better than certainly JD Vance on this issue. He's got a decent foreign policy record. And I'm with you, Francesca. Someone not wanting to, we're talking about 2005, 2006. By then, we knew it was BS. We knew that war was totally bogus. He was a grown adult. He was in his early 40s. This isn't somebody who was like 18, 19 trying to dodge. He was already at the point where he could retire, and they were expecting their second kid. Why would he do that?
Yeah. It's really interesting. And if I were Walz, I would hit back on this and actually talk about the Iraq war, and specifically talk about which party got us into the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, which was the Republican Party. George Bush is still nowhere to be found. Obviously, I think Donald Trump, that was his edge when it came to 2016, and Jeb Bush and everybody else was basically like, we should have never gone in. And if we did go in, we take all the oil, right? His isolationism is obviously purely bloodthirsty, but Democrats still have not picked up the mantle and have not waved it in the face enough of the Republicans, largely because they often vote for the war, and many of them, other than Barbara Lee, did at the time. But still, like, remember who got us into trillions of dollars of debt on these, these fool's errands of wars? It was the Republicans. And who got Osama bin Laden, if we're actually taking score? It was Obama.
The right especially likes to glom onto this anti-intervention and forever wars narrative. And I hope everyone watching this sees through it, because while they're saying, oh, we're not the party of war, that's the Democratic Party. What is the right doing on China? What is the right talking about in context of our southern border? They want to militarize the southern border, and they are egging on a war with China. It's not that they don't want war, they just want war elsewhere. And I would hope everybody watching this understands the right is not a peace party. The right is not the party of diplomacy. You can see that in their rhetoric, you can see that in their actions, and you can see that in them demanding an ever-increasing military budget. It is totally bogus. So for JD Vance, again, this is somebody who has tried to frame himself as the guy who is against forever and endless wars, trying to invoke this, the worst example of a foreign policy blunder in recent memory, the Iraq War, predicated on lies, totally destructive, left tens, if not hundreds of thousands of innocent people dead as a result. That's what he's trying to split hairs over, whether Tim Walz retired as a E8 or an E9. That's just total insidery BS.
Last thing, because the clip that you showed, that Vance, where he's trying to get Walz on not actually being in combat, he's actually making Walz's point, which is weapons of war that are used abroad should not be in the streets of the United States, which to your point, actually Republicans love when weapons of war are in the streets, except for when one of those weapons of war nearly kills their god emperor, in which case they have nothing to say about that weapon of war. But every time they try and hit Walz, it only makes me like him more, where they're like, oh, he's making this point about gun control, about gun safety, right? And as he said, he's a hunter, he was in the military, but even he knows that we shouldn't have things like AR-15s or these automatic weapons in the hands of civilians. It's just like, it's such a long way to go to make such a stupid, non-existent point. And on the journey, you're only doing PR for Walz.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.